Yeah, we're all frustrated. Frustrating situation to be in, but we got to find a way to make that translate. And first and foremost, myself, I have to be better. And as a unit, we can't put out, we can't have performances like that. We're better than that. We can't put that on film. So yeah, it's very frustrating.
The Bryce Young era is not off to the best start, but I'm not ready to wave the white flag on the first overall pick quite yet. Statistically for Young this season, it hasn't been great. He's completing 63% of his passes for 1,500 yards, 8 touchdowns to 7 interceptions, and has looked overwhelmed at times. The Panthers as a team are honestly probably the worst in the league this season and currently hold the #1 overall pick, which would be an awesome asset if the Panthers actually own the pick. You see, they traded that selection along with DJ Moore, the team's best offensive weapon from a year ago, and another second-round pick to the Chicago Bears for Bryce Young. And I believe that trade and how it's ultimately gonna turn out is the root to why so many people are writing off Young and calling the Panthers one of the worst franchises in the National Football League. If the Panthers had the rights to their own pick, I think there would be less pressure on Young to perform right away this season and some more optimism from fans who had relatively high expectations for the team this year. I know a handful of Panther fans, and they believe that this team could compete for the divisional title this season. With how Carolina ended last year after firing Matt Rule and expecting to get some more stability at the quarterback position with the #1 overall pick, I can't blame Panther fans for thinking that their team could be competitive this season. But now that that's all come crashing down, who's really to blame and where do the Panthers go from here? Now, obviously, as the main topic of this video, we need to start this dialogue talking about Bryce Young and his career thus far. I need to be upfront though, during the draft process, I was not super high on Bryce Young. I didn't love his size or his physical talent, and I really did push back against the thought that he was some elite prospect that was a slam dunk first overall pick. And although that take looks pretty strong right now, especially with how good CJ Stroud is playing, who I did advocate for being the #1 overall pick, that doesn't mean that Bryce can't turn out to be a good player when it's all said and done. I do think though that his path to being a top 5 elite quarterback or a mini Mahomes, who many people compared him to coming out of the draft, is a bit far-fetched at this point. His arm strength has not looked very impressive as many thought it would coming out of Bama. Often his velocity and intermediate throws isn't super strong, and he struggled with throws outside of the numbers pretty consistently. My biggest concern though has been his lack of escapability so far in his NFL career, and I believe that is due to his pretty mid athleticism at the NFL level. This isn't the SEC or college football. Everybody you're playing against in the NFL on the defensive line is a 300-pound athletic freak, and I do worry that playing at Alabama might have overstated Young's athleticism. Now, we will talk about his offensive line and supporting cast in a minute, which I do think plays a part in this, but I don't think the Panthers really expected Young to struggle to move around like he has so far. So those are some of the criticisms I have for Young so far, but that doesn't mean that he has no strengths to his game either. I was worried about how he would throw over the middle of the field as a 5'10 quarterback. His anticipation and accuracy over the middle of the field has really served as his bread and butter, and I do think that's something that you can build off of if you're the Panthers coaching staff. His pocket presence and maneuvering inside the pocket has translated nicely. Although he struggled to consistently extend plays for long periods and make off-script plays, it feels like every game he steps up in the pocket and picks up a first down with his legs, which is definitely a nice trait to have. But ultimately, at this point with Bryce Young, I think the ceiling for him as a player is to be around a Tua Tagovailoa type of quarterback. And I know Tua gets a bad rep from most of NFL Twitter and people take that as an insult, but I personally view Tua as easily a top 10 quarterback and probably even a bit higher than that. Tua, like Bryce, struggles to throw outside the numbers and extending plays, but I do think Bryce has more athleticism than Tua, which means Bryce does have some more potential as an off-script playmaker. But when you look at both of their games, it's passes over the middle of the field, it's winning with timing, anticipation, and accuracy, and I think that's the model the Panthers front office needs to take in regards to building a team around Bryce. As it states right now, the Panthers' best skill position player is 33-year-old Adam Thielen, which is pretty embarrassing. I like Thielen, he's a good guy, but there's no way in 2023 that he should be a team's wide receiver 1, and that's really a colossal failure by Frank Reich and Scott Fitterer that that's the case. Jacoby Myers was a free agent this past offseason who's having a great season with the Raiders, and so was DeAndre Hopkins, who is a bit older but definitely could have helped out the Panthers for a year or two with a young quarterback. But fine, they decided to settle for Adam Thielen and DJ Chark. I can live with that, but that also means in the draft that they needed to go out and get a guy that could help Bryce Young right away. And I don't really think the Panthers did that. They had the first shot of a wide receiver in the second round with the 8th pick and decided to go with Jonathan Mingo, a developmental wide receiver who does not separate well out of Ole Miss. They passed on the likes of Jaden Reed, Rashee Rice, Marvin Mims, and even Tank Dell, who's catching bomb after bomb from CJ Stroud in Houston. All those guys had long, productive careers in college and also have a lot more juice than Mingo has as far as a deep threat down the field and a separator. Maybe Mingo turns out to be a good player, but for year 1 and 2 of the young quarterback, I don't think Mingo is the right type of wide receiver to select. Up front for the Panthers, I've been pretty disappointed with their offensive line this year. I was pretty bullish on them heading into the season as well. I love their tackle duo with Akeem Ekwonu and Taylor Moton, but Ekwonu has regressed mightily this year. He's allowed 5 sacks and has the second most penalties for any offensive lineman with 9. And then the interior of the offensive line has just been flat out awful, which is especially troublesome when you have a smaller quarterback who needs passing lanes to throw over the middle of the field. Their starting center, Bradley Bozeman, has allowed 4 sacks. Austin Corbett, the right guard, has allowed 3 sacks himself. And then their left guard, journeyman Calvin Throckmorton, has the lowest PFF grade of the 3 with a 50.6. So the injury to Brady Christensen that happened early in the season definitely hurt this unit, and as a result, it's been one of the worst in the league this year. The last thing I want to mention as far as personnel goes is the backfield, and I think the situation perfectly sums up the Panthers front office. In free agency this past year, they decided to let go of Deontay Foreman, their leading rusher from a season ago who only started 9 games. He had 914 yards and 5 touchdowns and was one of their best players down the stretch. And the Panthers just decided to let him walk, and he signed a contract with the Chicago Bears for only $3 million. And to replace him, the Panthers went out and signed Miles Sanders from the Philadelphia Eagles and gave him $25 million. And since then, Sanders has been benched for Chuba Hubbard and is averaging 3.2 yards per carry this year. Yes, the offensive line hasn't helped him out a ton, but Hubbard has looked far better and is more productive behind the exact same offensive line. And when you could have had your leading rusher from a year ago for 1/8 the price, it makes this signing look even worse. So now the question becomes, how do the Panthers fix this? Well, they're going to have a massive offseason in 2024. They roughly have $60 million in cap space, albeit before signing Brian Burns to a massive deal, but that should be enough cap to get another veteran wide receiver and some O-line help before the draft. And luckily for Carolina, this is a great wide receiver free agent class. Mike Evans will be on the market along with T. Higgins, Michael Pittman Jr., Calvin Ridley, and Marquise Brown. And objective number 1 for the front office in the offseason has to be to acquire one of those wide receivers for Bryce Young. Then you head into the draft with 6 draft picks headlined by their 2nd and 3rd rounder, and those again need to be used offensively. I think the interior of the offensive line should be addressed, maybe the top guard or center on the board, but you have to try and maximize what you can do with relatively low resources to surround Bryce Young with a lot of talent. And lastly, owner David Tepper is going to have to decide if he wants to continue with this regime. He's been very quick to fire coaches for both of his franchises in the Panthers and Charlotte FC. I wouldn't be surprised to see both Reich and Fritter gone if Carolina does finish the season like 3-14. And honestly, that's probably the way to go. I'm not really a huge believer in either of them. And I think getting a young offensive mind like Ben Johnson might be better served for Bryce Young than keeping some questionable decision makers for the sake of continuity. But that's what I think about Bryce Young and the current state of the Carolina Panthers. Let me know what you think about this team and Bryce Young and what they can do to turn around their franchise this offseason. Have you given up on Bryce Young? Do you think the Panthers should have drafted CJ Stroud or another one of the top quarterbacks? Or do you still have hope that he can turn out to be who we saw at Alabama if the Panthers continue to build around him properly? But subscribe to the channel if you are new, drop a like on the video if you did enjoy it, and as always, thank you so much for watching, and I'll catch you guys in my next one.